You are watching your award-winning cable access station, Channel 13 and 19, Athol-Orange Community Television.
Hello, I'd like to get started. It's a little after 7. Let's see. Okay. My name's Jack Buckley. I'm the director of the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. First thing I'd like to do is thank Mahar Regional High School for hosting us tonight. This is the scene, I've been here many times, the scene of the Mahar Fish and Game Club dinner. So we're glad to be back here, and I want to thank them for hosting us. There's a few people that I'd like to introduce before we get started. What we're going to have tonight, Tom French, our Assistant Director of Natural Heritage and Endangered Species, is going to give a presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions or comments, okay? Few people I'd like to recognize are the 3 members of the Fisheries and Wildlife Board here. Our chairman from Lennox, George Deary. Mike Roach from Orange, who represents this part of the state on the board, and Dr. Joseph Larson from Pelham, who represents the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species interest on the Fish and Wildlife Board. From our Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Advisory Committee, David Small from the Athol Bird Club, who many of you I'm sure know. Division staff that are here tonight, Ralph Taylor, our Connecticut Valley District Manager, Bill Davis, who is our Central District Manager, Dr. Tom French, our Assistant Director, as I said, Marion Lassen, our Chief of Information and Education, is here, and Nicole DeAngelis, our Outreach Coordinator. From DCR Division of Water Supply, Bill Pula, Dan Clark, and we have 3 snake scientists, 2 snake scientists joining us tonight. Ann Stengel from UMass Amherst is here, and she's also the coordinator on our large grant that Tom will talk about in his presentation. And Tom Tyning, a herpetologist from Berkshire Community College. With that, I will turn it over to Tom French for his presentation, and after that we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments. And I'd particularly like to thank you all for actually coming here tonight. It's actually refreshing to be in a part of the state where there's so much interest in natural resources in the natural world. So I really do appreciate your coming. Tom?
Thank you. I've got my own mic. Thank you.
Okay.
So I do want to thank you for coming too. What I'm going to do is I have 26 slides in a PowerPoint that hopefully will go through and give you an idea what our reasoning is for wanting to do the project, what's drawn us or driven us to design this, what some of the natural history traits and requirements of timber rattlesnakes, and what we actually have planned to do. And then after that, if you have questions, and I'm sure you will, but I'm going to try to answer many of them and predict what they might be during my initial presentation, we'll have plenty of time to answer those questions. We will not have questions until we're at the end, though.
I just want your credentials, your education.
Okay, if you do. My background is I come from Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up around venomous snakes all through my younger years. I've personally handled eastern diamondbacks, timbers, canebrakes, copperheads, coral snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, in a variety of cottonmouths and a variety of other species of snakes from the south. So I got a bachelor's degree in science from Georgia State University. I went to Auburn University, which is quite a reptile program, for a master's in science at Auburn. I went to Indiana State University for a PhD, and I went to Cornell for a postdoc. So I've had more college than my kids want to think about, that's for sure. Before we get started, I'd like to get a bit of a show of hands for some things so I have a little bit better feel for the audience. How many of you here have actually seen a wild timber rattlesnake in Massachusetts? Very impressive. Very impressive. So, how many of you just don't really feel terribly comfortable around snakes in general? It's about even, actually. How many of you have hiked some part of the M&M Trail in the Holyoke Range or some part of the Appalachian Trail south of, from Massachusetts all the way south through Georgia, some part of that? That is actually a majority of people, which is good because you already have experience hiking in timber rattlesnake habitat. Literally, the Appalachian Trail goes down the backbone of the Appalachians, one rattlesnake population after the next. So you've already been in rattlesnake habitat. That's also true in many of our state parks here in Massachusetts. That's part of our problem. Our remaining rattlesnake populations are in some of our most heavily traveled state parks and state forests and wildlife lands. So I guess the last thing, how many of you have seen the 5-minute interview I did that's on YouTube or Facebook or our website? All right, that's less than half of you. So that means that I want to ask that you sort of start from scratch. There's a lot of things that have come out in the media that aren't accurate. They weren't things that we've said, weren't things that we've planned. So if you can start from here and see what I have to say in the program. If you have questions or disagreements, we'll talk about them when I'm done. Okay, I think most of you are familiar with the state's Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. Just like any wildlife agency across the country, we are, can we fix that, Ralph? Can you get the focus down where we can see the whole thing? I'll talk through it while we see if we can do that. We're science-based. We try to make our management decisions based on the best science. We have very highly trained staff compared to other agencies. It's our mission and it's our statutory responsibility to restore, conserve, and manage all of our wildlife resources in the state. And that means things that are very popular and things that aren't popular. Native wildlife is a requirement we have statutorily to try to protect and manage. And for most of those species, it only requires that we provide habitat. Most species don't require or need anything special. They just need a good place to live. But for a number of these species, if they require early successional habitats, pitch pine scrub oak or grasslands, that requires active management. If we don't, they'll grow up, the habitat isn't the same, and the species can't survive. But there are some that require more proactive intervention. Probably 43 years ago, 44 years ago, we established the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, 1978, whatever that works out in the math. And this is what really made us a comprehensive fish and wildlife agency. For the first time, we had the legal responsibility to also ensure the health and survival of our native plants and invertebrates. This wasn't the case before that, but it has been for nearly for 40 years or so. So some of these are very familiar and very well known. Some of them are very unfamiliar. Some of them, it takes an expert to really correctly identify them. Species like the bald eagle are obviously very popular. And when we were involved in restoring the bald eagle, bringing them back because they had completely disappeared, the thing that popped up oftentimes was they were a patriotic icon for the country. It was a patriotic act to be restoring them. And while that's very true, for Massachusetts, the timber rattlesnake actually played a more important role in our early patriotic struggle for freedom than the bald eagle ever did. So starting in 1622, when the chief of the Narragansetts delivered a bundle of arrows to Governor Winthrop in Plymouth as a challenge to war, he turned around and removed the bundle of arrows and filled the snake's skin with shot and powder and sent it back as a counter challenge. And in the end, there was a stalemate and nothing happened. And in the Revolutionary War, you may lose sight of the fact that the Gadsden flag was created for the Continental Marines based in Massachusetts. It's been used for other things since, but it really was originally a flag to show our resistance in the Revolutionary War. When the Pilgrims arrived, timber rattlesnakes were very widespread across all of New England. And the green is an approximation of what their distribution was. More recently, since they've been persecuted for several hundred years since colonial settlement, their range and their numbers has dramatically declined. Now, that's not just for rattlesnakes. It was for everything that was a predator. It posed a risk to our livestock, to our game in the forest like deer and grouse and rabbits we wanted to hunt. Anything that was a bad animal, and back then there were good animals and bad animals. Bad animals, there were bounties for them. You could kill a red-tailed hawk and take its right leg to your town clerk and get paid for it for doing your civil duty. It was your duty to rid the landscape of that bad animal. Paid for it by your town government. Rattlesnakes were among them. At that time, a century ago, you ought to be afraid of a rattlesnake. It could kill you. And the same is true with rabid animals. We're fearful of rabies because a century ago it was a lethal disease all the time. Today, that's not the case. Rabies is easily treated. Venomous snake bites are reasonably easily treated. And we have not had a fatality since colonial times in Massachusetts from a timber rattlesnake. So the risk, we have 6.5 million people in this year with no fatalities on an annual basis, and not even an accidental bite for that matter for at least 50 years that I can think of. I've been involved in maybe 6 bites in my career, but there were people keeping illegal pets, rattlesnakes as pets. There were people who were capturing them in the wild illegally, or my favorite is they wanted a better photograph, so they were poking it with a stick that should have been longer than it was. So we're left with about 5 populations in Massachusetts. Interestingly, amazingly, one of them within the Route 128 inner belt of Boston still has timber rattlesnakes. This area here, which includes 3 states, this area actually only goes about 1/3 as far east as it used to and only half as far north. It's really shrunken down. And so it's the number of snakes in the state, I've said probably no more than 200. It could be more than that. People ask, how the hell do you know? Well, we know because almost every single one in the state has a microchip in it. We've been looking at them closely enough and long enough that virtually every timber rattlesnake in this state has been handled and has its own unique numbered microchip. The problems are with timber rattlesnakes is people cannot refrain from killing them when they encounter them. And sometimes we wouldn't know this except for the fact that a number of the snakes have been followed in this state with radio transmitters. So you lose a snake or go looking for a snake and you find it 4 feet off a hiking trail with his head cut off. And the only reason we found it is because it had a radio transmitter in it. Otherwise, we'd have never known. There's anything harder than finding a rattlesnake in the wild? it's a dead rattlesnake in the wild. They're really hard to spot. And there's road mortality. This is true almost, Massachusetts is so dissected by roads that it's hard for any animal to go very far without having to cross a road. And so this is a common cause of mortality for some of our populations, not necessarily all of them. And illegal collecting. Rattlesnakes can have a value. People like to keep them as pets. You might not think they're cute and cuddly, but a lot of people like to keep them as pets. Right? We have some herpetologists on the front row, and I'm sure they do like snakes and lizards to keep as pets. But in this state, that's not legal, not without a special permit. And there are people that deliberately go out looking to kill them too. Most of the mortality, I think, is incidental. A hiker not looking for a rattlesnake just happens to come across one crossing the trail and kills it. If you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, there's a very good chance you're going to encounter a timber rattlesnake. And that's not because you're seeking them, but some people do go out looking for them, trying to kill them as well. And habitat fragmentation. As I said about that network of roads, those roads break up the habitat into small pieces, and they don't have big enough chunks of habitat to continue their entire life successfully. Now, what you may not know is, since 1979, it has been completely illegal in this state to harm a rattlesnake. Now, I don't think anybody here would be surprised that it's a fairly major offense to poach a moose in Massachusetts. We have no hunting season for them. It's a big game animal. If you kill a moose, you'd expect to be in trouble. You probably don't realize that killing a timber rattlesnake is a far more serious criminal offense than killing a moose. It's an endangered species. The Endangered Species Act and the penalties are far more severe than killing one of our big game animals. And that's deliberate, because those species will be impacted by the loss of individuals in the population. Our game animals will not. So the fact that they're declining is not restricted to just Massachusetts. It's a phenomenon that's happening essentially throughout the parts of the country that are fairly heavily developed. They're listed as endangered in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Ohio, and threatened in New York. As a result of their being imperiled, they are protected under the Endangered Species Act in Massachusetts. This does have a severe penalty, but it also has proactive parts to it as well. So if you look at this bottom part, which you can't completely see, this is 131A is the State Endangered Species Act. It requires that all agencies, departments, boards, commissions, authorities shall utilize their authorities in the furtherance of the purposes of this chapter. In other words, in plain simple English, every agency and every committee or board or whatever of that agency is required to do what they can to benefit imperiled species that are officially state listed, so long as that does not conflict with the mission or the primary purpose of what they are overseeing from a regulatory point of view. So as an example, we have the Fish and Wildlife Board and we have the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Advisory Committee. Our mission is to restore and conserve and manage imperiled species, so that's a no-brainer. But for DCR and Quabbin, you have the QWAC, Quabbin Watershed Advisory Committee, and you have the Water Supply Protection Trust, that both are actively advising or helping to regulate activities of Quabbin. The main, as I understand it, the primary purpose of Quabbin is for water supply, drinking water supply, and recreation. So long as this project does not conflict with either of those, then the agencies are essentially required to try to do what they can to assist in the protection of rare species. So that's really part of the question. Does it conflict with water supply or with recreation? And I would say recreation is what we're all concerned about. That's probably, I don't think anybody thinks it's going to bother the water quality, in spite of that cartoon that was in, I think, the Worcester paper that had rattlesnakes coming out the faucet. Not going to happen. I liked it, by the way. More recently, there's been a concern with an emerging disease. Now, we're in a period where it's really scary. We have emerging diseases both on the human front and on the wildlife front. So it sort of started, in my mind, the whole sort of entourage of diseases, emerging diseases with AIDS, Ebola, SARS, avian influenza, now the Zika virus, West Nile virus. And with wildlife, it's been the same way. We have chytrid fungus that has driven many frog species around the world to extinction. We have West Nile virus, which really knocked many of our bird populations down. We have white nose syndrome with bats. It's killed over 6 million bats since 2006 in the Northeast. And 99% of the northern long-eared, right here in Orange and throughout. And little brown bats used to be arguably our most abundant bat in the state. 99.9% were killed. And we do have some, and they'll hopefully recover. And then we had this emerging fungal disease in snakes. First described, I think, in the 50s, but really didn't hit Massachusetts until 2006, I believe it was. And there was a fear that it might emerge as a rapidly spreading, wide and geographically widespread disease generically of snakes. We know that it's affected over a dozen species of snakes, but it's really only hit timber rattlesnakes in the extreme northeast at a population scale, and Massasauga rattlesnakes out in Illinois at a population scale. Otherwise, it's turned out that it's just been fairly affected individuals in populations and not the population. But as a result, I actually was the author of a grant proposal to look at this disease and see if it was a threat to snakes generically and timber rattlesnakes in the Northeast specifically. And this grant competed nationally with endangered species issues in Hawaii and Florida and California. And in the end, we actually were awarded the maximum available of $500,000 with 8 cooperating states and 7 cooperating organizations, including a federal organization, the National Wildlife Health Center in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, you divide $500,000 up between all those organizations, there's not that much money. But people keep asking, where's the money coming from? How much is it going to cost? We were able, as the other states were, to really get a handle on our rattlesnake populations and their status and their health through this grant. We are actually extending it through next summer as well, and this allowed us to make relationships with some of these other groups that we're going to work with as cooperators, and this set us up with the ability to do that. Most of our agencies, or especially our programs funding, comes from federal grants. We get very, very little state tax dollars. People are talking about tax money going into this. If you were to divide what your reimbursement would be if you don't want to pay for any endangered species management across this state whatsoever, eagles, falcons, orchids, anything, you're going to get reimbursed 2 cents each. That's what you pay in your tax dollars for endangered species management in this state. Very, very little. So we have states that were scattered all over, from Minnesota to New Hampshire down to Tennessee. And I want to go over the natural history. There's a lot been said about what makes timber rattlesnakes tick. How big are they? How long do they live? Well, if you look, for a female, she's got to be 9 or 10 years of age at this latitude north to have her first litter. So it doesn't, the males can reproduce a little bit younger, but that's irrelevant. The female reproduction drives the population dynamics. So the females have to be 9 to 10 years old. It's a long time to live. avoid predators, so there's a lot of mortality that happens before that age. Greatest mortality is in the youngest years. So a newborn, a neonate, an infant timber rattlesnake is snack food for everything in the forest. And so as they get older, it's the older animals that don't get preyed upon so much and contribute to the population. And so they'll live 30 years for a good full adult and rarely 40 years. The problem is, with a state as populated as we are, they don't get the chance to live that long. Because in that period of time, they're going to encounter somebody that's going to kill them or some predator that's going to eat them. They only reproduce every 3 to 5 years. Farther south, they reproduce more frequently than that because they have longer summers. But up here, only 3 to 5 years. So if a snake does get to live to be 30 years old, it's only going to have 6 litters. And the average is going to be 9. It can be more, but it can be quite a bit less as well. But the average is 9 per litter. And most of those will die in the first year or 2. So they don't breed like rabbits. They have to be fairly old, and they have fairly low reproductive success. The adults are not 5 and 6 feet long. Rarely, I mean, down south you can get 5-foot timber rattlesnakes. I think they probably used to occur up here when we had 40-year-plus old animals occasionally. But generally, a 3-foot animal is an adult female, a 4-foot a male, and occasionally you can get a 4.5-foot animal. So, for up here at this far north, timber rattlesnake is our heaviest snake we have in the state. Not our longest. Black rat snakes are longer, black racers are longer, but they're our heaviest rattlesnake in New England. Growing up in the South, that's not the case. We have a lot of big snakes down there. But up here, most of our snakes are small. The dispersal distance has been talked about a lot. It depends on the age and sex of the snake. If it's gravid, i.e. if it's pregnant, it's not going to go very far from where it hibernates. Remember the hibernation, well, you don't need to remember because I haven't told you yet, but the hibernation site is the anchor for that snake throughout its entire life. Most of our common, well, all of our common snakes can hibernate in your backyard. They don't need anything special. They don't need to go very deep. They hibernate fairly shallow in your backyard. Timber rattlesnakes, copperheads, by the way, we have 3 populations. They're doing better. We're the northeasternmost location where copperheads occur in North America. Copperheads, timber rattlesnakes, and to some degree black racers really like, black racers like, but the other 2 need, they require a uniquely deep place to hibernate. So generally we're talking a place under a cliff or an escarpment where you have that pile of talus rock or a boulder field where the glaciers have plucked off boulders from the back of that escarpment, and you have a pile that can go down really deep. I mean, it can go down 10, 20, 30 feet sometimes in some places where these things could go down, but they have to be deep. It sometimes can be bedrock with a really deep fissure, so a big crack in bedrock. But what they do is in the spring, they come out of that hibernation site, they bask in the warm spring sun, night gets cool, they go back in, they come back out the next day, but eventually as spring warms up, they leave the hibernation site to go hunt. And for a gravid female, it's only about 1,000 feet that she'll go from that hibernation site, and she'll get into what we call a nursery area, which is usually a piece of bedrock where she can soak in a lot of sun. She's got to do a lot of metabolizing for those young to mature before she gives birth. But for a non-gravid female, 1.3 miles or less is usually how far they go. And many of them are much less, but 1.3 miles is usually the typical maximum. For a male, it's maybe 2.5 or less is the maximum. But the absolute record I've ever heard of is 4.5. So that's a lot longer. That's an outlier. That's an unusual disperser that can go much farther away. But keep in mind, one that goes that far can't stay for very long because it's taken them most of the summer to get out there. They've got to turn around and go back. If they don't get back, they don't get that unique deep hibernation site, they die over the winter. For newborns, they're born 1,000 feet away from the hibernation site. So how the heck do they find their way back? They stay with mom for several weeks, sometimes almost a month, and she leaves them and goes back to the den site in the fall, and the young will start to disperse and they will track her. They'll trail her back to the den site by smell. And if they cross the trail of another rattlesnake, they may follow that one back. Now, in an area that has a lot of outcrops, there may be a couple of different holes or cracks they can go into. So that's the way a newborn might actually end up in a different hole than the mom, because it's crossed the trail of another snake and it tracks it back to its den site. So this unusually deep hibernation site is the greatest limiting factor. So that's why when we lose a population, well, they can't disperse across the landscape. It can never get repopulated. It's not like all those animals we lost during the 17 and 1800s from clearing the landscape and persecuting them. We lost all of our bear, our fisher, our beaver, our turkeys, our eagles, our falcons, our what else? I already said fisher, our moose, almost all of our deer even. They all came back because they can fly or they can walk long distances. The rattlesnakes cannot do that. And so that's why they have not been able to reoccupy that big green area we saw in the earlier map. So here's Quabbin. The dilemma we're facing and the reason we've looked to Quabbin is we have all 5 of our existing rattlesnake populations, which we've been working to keep from disappearing, in places where there's heavy human traffic. The one south of Boston has over 200,000 hikers a year where we have a rattlesnake population. The public doesn't get bit, their pets don't get bit, but rattlesnakes every year, periodically, we end up with either road mortality or hiker deliberately killing them. So, what we really have gotten down to here is a scenario where we really need to have a safety net, and we're looking for one place in the state, and only one, that we can protect snakes from people. We don't want snakes coming off that island to interact with hikers here. First of all, like our other parks, they wouldn't get bit, but we still don't want that because we want to protect the snakes from people. We don't want people to ever see them. We want them on this island, and so the chosen island is Mount Zion, 1,300 plus acres, 3.6 miles long. It's as large as a couple of our complete sets of habitat for our existing populations. So it's big enough to accommodate an entire population forever, and it has that unique boulder field deep habitat right up there under an escarpment at the north end. Can they swim? Of course they can swim. They're perfectly good swimmers. Will they? Probably not, because there's no motivation, for one thing, because they're out there on an island. If you stood on that island, people have been telling me, well, it's an island. They won't have enough food. They've got tons of food. It's just like the mainland. If you're standing there on that island, you wouldn't know you were on an island. It feels like the mainland. It's big. It's got all the species of snakes, all the species of predators, birds, mammals that the mainland has. So, if they swim off, there's a couple of things. First of all, there's a bald eagle nest. I can't remember. It's like here or here. The bald eagle nest on this shore right here. A floundering snake out in the water is going to be a sitting duck for a bald eagle. So it's going to feed eagle chicks probably. If it gets off, it could get over there. Not a problem. But it wouldn't, because these things instinctively know they've got to trail themselves back to the hibernation site. You might get one off. That's why, you might get an odd, rogue snake that decides to bail off the island. That's why for the first decade at least, we're going to have a radio transmitter in every single new snake released. We don't want to lose the snake. We go get it and bring it back. So we're not going to have snakes that are disappearing into the sunset over on the mainland. Can they come south? Absolutely they can. You get down here is 3.6 miles. Well, one of that, that outlying number was 4.5 miles. So there's the Baffle Dam. It's quarter mile or so here. Then there's another island that's quarter. And they could plausibly, that outlier 4.5 mile trek, could get them onto the mainland here. Still off limits to the public down there. Did it not? Pula, it's not? Okay. All right, so you can walk to the end of the Baffle Dam. Well, first of all, there's a porta-john right there. We don't care. It's not going to be any kind of a threat to the public whatsoever. Just like it's not when you go up in the hills and parks today. They could be there, but we're talking such low probabilities. It's like getting struck by lightning while you're holding an ice cream cone in both hands. Just the kind of scenario you're never going to have happen. So the other thing is that down here, the riprap along the Baffle Dam is incredibly good habitat that it would stop them right there. It's like feeding geese in the migration that short stops them. They'd have all kinds of food there. There's more water snakes, by the way, down there than there'll ever be rattlesnakes probably on the island in the next several decades. And they're arguably more aggressive than, or at least as aggressive as the rattlesnakes. And I personally used to take my son down. That would always be our destination for fishing out of Gate 43 because we had so many water snakes. We loved watching the water snakes and the turtles while we fished. And we never got bit by a water snake. And so again, it's the risks are, we might worry about them, but they're really not there. Interestingly, here is an area of where the restricted areas are, and I can see that it's not off limits right there. But our first choice was actually what's called Rattlesnake Ledge. Sometimes it's right at, I think it's called Lighthouse Hill in most maps today, which is over in this area right here. That was our first choice because it's easy access. You can just drive right in there and it's off limits to the public. It's not an island. We don't need an island. We need a place that is anchored to a hibernation site. The problem with this one was not that that there was enough habitat. There's more habitat here than there is here. The snakes couldn't get far enough up to get back on public land or area land open to the public. It would be a perfectly fine rattlesnake spot. The Rattlesnake Ledge is somewhere like down in here. But the problem is these rattlesnakes were here. They were all over. You notice Rattlesnake Hill. There's the, as I say, Rattlesnake Ledge. We had a lot of rattlesnakes in this part of the state. But they were wiped out in the 1700s. And so that was before the reservoir. And so I think the reservoir has flooded most of the historic habitat on the west side of the Prescott Peninsula. So that was the reason there wasn't enough of the habitat left over there to support the snakes. That's the island. And the island is the next biggest piece of protected or restricted habitat. So this is what it looks like up on that north end. There's an escarpment right up there, and that's maybe, I don't know, Dan, 100 yards maybe from the bottom to the top, the length of a football field. And it is, look at the size of the boulders that are here. They're like anywhere from, size of Volkswagens practically. They're really big. It's hard to maneuver through. There's lots of nooks and crannies and holes. It's covered with moss and ferns. And you'll try to walk between the rocks, you'll fall down to your waist in some places. This is where, when the snakes get higher up on the hill, they can go down really deep. And there's exposed rock on top. They can bask, and it's really decent. It's very nice rattlesnake habitat. And without radio transmitters, you put a rattlesnake in this site, or any kind of snake, it's going to disappear like a drop of water in a bucket. It just into the ether, because just look how complex that habitat is. And as a result, they're not going to, that's one of the reasons they don't move very far. The kind of habitat they like, they don't need to move very far. So here's a good example. This is as you go more towards the edge and you start to peter out of it at that same location, just another shot of the rocks. And this is the way the rattlesnakes like to be, underneath one of those rock ledges, get out in the sun in the morning, pull back into the shade in the evening, and go back down in the hole. So what do they eat? They love chipmunks and white-footed mice. And there's enough chipmunks and white-footed mice there to feed a gazillion rattlesnakes. They're never going to run out of chipmunks and white-footed mice. Every other predator out there is eating these too. The rattlesnakes will also eat pine voles and shrews and thrushes and catbirds and song sparrows and other things that spend time on the ground. They're not restricted to these, but these are two of their favorite. And this is the way they do it. They coil up next to a log, which is a runway for a mouse or a chipmunk, and they sit there with a chin right there on it, and they ambush them as they go by. And so, very effective. They're very patient. They may sit there for 2 weeks, but in 2 weeks, a mouse or a chipmunk is going to go by there, and they're going to pop it. And for a grown one, they only need to eat the equivalent of about 4 chipmunks in an entire summer. If they had a bad year and they only ate one, it wouldn't kill them. They'd make it through to the next year, and they'd make up the difference the following year. So food is no issue. There's loads of food out there. And I've been hearing, though, concerns. They'll run out of food, and they'll up like ship rats and swim to the shore and breed very rapidly on the mainland. Again, they don't breed very rapidly anywhere, in somewhat, unfortunately, from our point of view. The predators, every one of these predators at one time or another is on Mount Zion. Some of them are always out there. You've got barred owls, great horned owls, red-shouldered hawks. That red-shouldered, by the way, has got a big banded water snake like you'd get on the Baffle Dam. And then you see that water snake trying to bite the red-shouldered. They don't care. They don't know the difference between a poisonous snake and a non-poisonous snake. They just kill snakes. They don't want to get bit by either one of them. But they do it. They're not afraid. So here's a red-shouldered with a big banded water snake. Here's a red tail with a big black racer. Here's a bobcat with another banded water snake. And interesting, black racers themselves are major predators on the juvenile rattlesnakes until they get large. So there's raccoon, there's fisher, there's coyote, there's gray fox, there's eagle, there's bear. Skunk could be thrown on there for the young ones. There's lots of things that will make it difficult for the rattlesnakes to actually become well established. So here's what we're looking to do. And that is, from our other populations, you may have heard the quote, we're going to release 150 rattlesnakes on the island. That quote came from me being asked the question, how big is a healthy population of timber rattlesnakes? My answer was, if you go farther down the Appalachian chain, meaning Virginia, West Virginia, where they're still fairly common, there could be 150 rattlesnakes on one big, broad talus area that had multiple den sites. However, up here, we have small populations. They're declining. Less than 200 in the state. There could be some more, but not very many in the entire state, and none of those populations can afford to give up individuals. So what we have done is we're going to establish a small breeding population at Roger Williams Park Zoo. It's going to be 3 females and 2 males. Is that right? 3 females and 2 males, so 5 animals. We have 2 males and 1 female in captivity already. We're going to take 2 more females this spring, and that'll be our total breeding colony, 3 females, 3 reproductive females for the time being. We would potentially draw from juveniles and keep them from babies to trade out adults, because we don't want to have too many of them coming from the same genetic source. We want to be sure we have good, healthy genes in the population representing several parts of the state. But we're going to be focused on the juveniles, the neonates, the newborns. And so here are, the juveniles right after birth. Here's the head of a juvenile under mom. They stay with her for a while, and we will do head starting, just like we do for turtles. For turtles, we keep them for 9 months, gets them big enough that the raccoons and the herons and the bass don't eat them, and most of them grow up to be adults. Here, unfortunately, they grow much slower. We'll have to keep them for 2 winters, and I would guess that we will, if we are lucky, we'll be able to have anywhere from 1 to 10 per year that we could release. So it's going to take us a decade to do this, to get enough of them out there in a good age span to actually have self-sustaining reproduction. So we're working with Roger Williams Park Zoo. We've been working with them for about 6 years now. We've already been head starting young snakes for our two most imperiled populations to keep them from appearing. And we're getting a lot of attention. Here's Jeff Corwin from Ocean Mysteries in there with Lou Perotti, the head keeper for venomous snakes. They're doing filming for a television program. This is a newborn timber rattlesnake, so that's what we're working with, what we're starting with. And again, Jeff Corwin, Ocean Mysteries, and this is the head veterinarian there, Roger Williams, and what he's doing right now is implanting a radio transmitter. Unfortunately, snakes don't have much of a neck, so you can't put it as a collar. You have to surgically implant the radio transmitters. And so then we have to have them surgically removed when the batteries are finally worn out. So this is Ann and Jeff in the field. So there's a lot of, this has actually already been playing nationally. And so we're getting a fair bit of attention there, focused on particularly this grant that we're the lead state on the snake disease grant. And just more recently, Ann has been working with British broadcast company, Sir David Attenborough's channel with rattlesnakes in Massachusetts. And again, more of the story of the grant we have for snake disease. So here they are. They have just filmed the process of giving birth to live young from a rattlesnake. And the ambushing, that's a snake there, set up to ambush something across that log, and they successfully got a nice ambush scene of prey. Now, again, just to remind you, the other project that we focused on for Quabbin for endangered species restoration was bald eagles, and it worked really well. Here, with bald eagles, we actually did further restrict access around nests, as we did with common loons. We roped off areas where fishermen couldn't go, even in the historic areas open to fishing. And people didn't seem to mind that, to give wide berth to a loon nest or to an eagle nest. In this case, we see no reason to change one single thing as far as public access policies go at Quabbin. There's no need to. So, the question is, why am I just finding out about it? Well, that's kind of interesting because we went to the two Division of Fisheries and Wildlife groups in 2013 and 2014. We gave a presentation to the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Advisory Committee in late 2013. It's open to the public. We have minutes. The Fisheries and Wildlife Board in early 2014. It's my understanding that the Quabbin Watershed, that the Mass Water Supply Protection Trust heard about it and had some sort of discussion of it in 2000. Best I can tell, members of the QWAC, the Quabbin Watershed Advisory Committee, are aware of it and have talked about it, but they have not had it on their agenda. No big deal. We're not going to be able to even start this until at least spring of 2017. We're not going to do it this spring. It's going to be at least 2017. So there's plenty of time for that. In fact, I've heard that it's going to be on one of their upcoming agendas. So some of the misconceptions that I've heard, every one of these is something somebody's asked me or I've had an email about. So, have they already been released? No. And the press asked me, well, wouldn't it have been easier just to release them without asking? First of all, we couldn't keep a secret like that. We're not that good. We're not, some organization where our staff remember how or know how to keep good secrets. And besides, we have these 4 organizations whose legal responsibility it is to advise or regulate what we do on public lands and what we do as organizations. We are required to be open about this, and we're not bashful about being open about this. So it's been in public domain since 2013. I understand that it was some discussion in the Water Supply Trust that somebody that hadn't heard about it suddenly sent it out to the local press, and it went viral after that. And that's commonly what these sorts of things do. They go viral with some sort of stimulus. Will public access be further restricted? No, not because of this. Could be some other reason, but not because of this. Will rattlesnakes spread off Mount Zion and other parts of Quabbin? No, they just can't do that. They could get off of the island, sure. We'll know after the first decade whether or not that happens with any regularity, but with the radio transmitters, we'll have a very good handle on that, and they just physically would not have a place over on the mainland within range that they could survive their first winter. Will rattlesnakes be released on other islands? No. We have no interest in doing any others here or anywhere else. Is the project being done to control rodents? No. It would be a very lousy way to control rodents. It just wouldn't work very well. Since Mount Zion is an island, the snakes run out of food? No. It's huge. There's tons of food over there. Can the rattlesnakes hybridize with other species of snakes at Quabbin and therefore not require those deep places to hibernate? Absolutely not. No. So, summary. We're not bringing in rattlesnakes from somewhere else. People think that they often have told me they didn't think they occurred in Massachusetts. We're going to Tennessee or somewhere to get them. No, we're not. They were here. We're using only Massachusetts rattlesnakes. We have only 5 populations in heavily used public areas. The remaining populations are all in jeopardy. That's why we're being forced to do something. We really need to take some different action. It's our mission to be trying to do this. That's what our agency is about. We are trying to use already restricted areas with no change to other public access. We don't think it's necessary. Because of the limitations of these special hibernation sites, they're not going to be able to spread. And their presence in a restricted area, it really should be of no public impact whatsoever, because we don't want any overlap between people and snakes in this particular case. So, what we're going to do now.
Tom, I got to do one thing.
All right.
Before we take some questions and comments, I just wanted to introduce 2 folks that came in that I neglected to mention. 2 very good friends of the environment. Senator Ian Goby and Representative Susanna Whipsley. Oh, I just had to take care of that, Tom. Sorry.
Thank you. So we have Marion. We have a remote microphone. We want everybody to ask a question and speak into the microphone because this is being recorded. We want the questions to be well heard. And I'm online, so the answers will be well heard. If there's questions about biology, you disagree with what I say, we have Ann and Tom, and we have DCR people here. They can answer the questions as well.
Larry Gates with Quabbin Fisheries Association and on the Quack board. The one thing that keeps being brought up is no public access and everything. And there is public access there with the Santa cans from both sides.
Which now, where's the public access?
For the Santa can.
Well, okay. You know, no public access except for maybe here to the flag. You know, the island is 13. All right. All right. If we're talking an area as big as this room, I'll concede that yes, you can go to the. Now we could move it. I don't think there's any need whatsoever to move that porta-john.
I'm not saying there's a need to move it. I'm just saying that you saying there's no public access and him saying that there is public access. That's the only discrepancy I was.
The porta-john is there. I think it's fine staying right where it is. I don't think it's a public risk to anybody. And I would also add that there is access. DCR staff go out there. We'll be going out there. So it's not like there won't be people out there. And there's what's that? To the causeway? What's the access to the baffle dam? Let's clarify. You know, I am not a DCR person. Let's clarify.
On the director, Quabbin, that you can walk out on the baffle dam, but you're not supposed to go on to Zion, beyond where the porta potty, which is right on the end. We could move the porta potty to the other end of that baffle dam.
I don't care.
I don't know if we probably could and just decide. You know, you just need a place where the fishermen get to it and the guy with the truck can clean it. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's fine if that makes people feel better, but I don't think it's needed. Yes.
Ken Buzzle from Templeton. I just want to know if, no matter what anybody says here, is the program going to go on anyways? Are we just here to listen to?
Well, we're still in the mode of being sure we're going to do it right biologically. So we're going to be actually trying to go out there and capture black racers to see if we can put radio transmitters in them and be sure these boulder fields are deep enough. So we're trying to still get all our ducks in a row too. As I say, we're not planning to do this until no earlier than spring of 2017. And
that
so,
doesn't answer the question.
well, I don't know.
Are you going to do it anyways, no matter what people say here?
What I'm telling you by saying that is we have not firmly committed to doing it. But on the other hand, you know, we would need a tangible reason for not doing it. Well, I don't. Well, the answer to the question. Just to repeat the question: is it a fait accompli that this project is going to happen? No, it's not a fait accompli that this project is going to happen. I see no.
It's not based on public opinion. It's based on what you decide to do.
His question doesn't
Will,
make any difference whatsoever in the outcome.
well, it's not based on popularity. No, we will take all of your comments into consideration. If there's any of them that actually have a some basis in actual risk, then maybe we wouldn't do it. But as far as just simply not being in favor of it, that's another story. Can people torpedo it? Probably could.
Robert Paquette, Petersham, Mass. Maybe you missed something in the beginning. It says this agency is responsible to take care of endangered species. That's their mission. That's what they need to do. And they're just going about and doing it. Unless you plan on going out and crawling on your hands and knees on Mount Zion, what the hell difference does it make?
You know, I have to admit that's sort of where we started. We don't perceive a problem, but.
Ken Bright, New Salem, near Gate 22. Are there timber rattlesnakes presently on that island?
No. No. We believe, but we don't have good data because it was the 1700s that was an actual rattlesnake hibernacula on the island. But we can't prove that. We know there are rattlesnake hibernacula around Quabbin historically, but they were all wiped out long ago.
Thank you.
Ron Jenny, Orange. You say if a snake gets off the island, you'll bring it back. Are we going to be able to see this on a website knowing, in 10 years, how many snakes actually left the island and you had to bring back?
I wouldn't object to that. In
just
other words,
so
the question was, would we make public how many actually left the island after we've been saying that they wouldn't do that? Fine with me. I'm not quite sure the best format for that, but keep in mind though, and I know this doesn't seem to necessarily appease people's concerns and their fears. If you go to a state park in this state, there's a darn good chance you're walking right through rattlesnake habitat and have for the last, for your entire life.
And why is this project so needed?
Because those populations are being decimated by the people walking through that.
The populations where they're already at?
We need a microphone for she can, we can continue.
Okay, taking questions. I asked why then is this project so needed if they're everywhere? And if they're in the spots that you describe, why can't you increase the populations there instead of adding them to a new spot? Thank you.
We are not going to give up on a single population that is currently in the state, not a one. But our track record is, in spite of our best efforts, the public is killing more than we can keep up with. And the populations are physically declining. So it seems inevitable that we're going to lose on at least some of those. And we do believe strongly we need a safety net where there's one place that they'll be secure, that we don't have to micromanage them to keep them healthy.
Yep. Hi, my name is Charlotte Miller. I live in Belchertown. I graduated from Norwich University in 1976. I've been a 40-year RN, and I have a lot of stories to share about rattlesnake bites. Even though in your publications you say there have been no deaths, there have been near misses. That is what we call them in the hospital. So one of my stories back in 2003 was that an elderly lady, she was 80 years old, she lives in East Hampton, and as you know, there are rattlesnakes in Mount Tom Reservation. Her eyesight was not very good. She went to her garage in the spring, probably right around now, and she thought she saw a stick in her garage. She went to grab it. It was a rattlesnake. She came to Cooley Dickinson emergency room where I was an RN, and we had no anti-venom for her. So, you say there have been no deaths, but there have been many near misses.
Does anybody know about that bite, Tom?
Talk to Ray Conway, the emergency room director at that time at Northampton.
Well, yeah, it's interesting.
Sorry.
Rattlesnake bites make the literature. And I can't dispute that there might have been one that didn't make the literature, but we actually hear about even copperhead bites that happen or illegally hell snake bites that happen. This is one that has never, to my knowledge, made it to any of the literature that it's intended to fall itself into. So you may be right. Somebody, if you reach down and pick up a rattlesnake, you will get bit, I guarantee you. And so whether or not you misidentified it for a stick or whatever, you pick up a rattlesnake, it's going to bite you. And that's one of those, it's an accident in that sense, but it's not the accident in the sense of walking through the woods and getting ambushed by a rattlesnake bite you didn't see.
The question is how much costs to our taxpayers? I mean, we don't...
You probably came in...
a little bit late, I'm sorry.
A little bit late.
Where the high school
went
was.
over that.
What about the federal and state combined, I think is what she means, not just the state.
Yeah. Well, is essentially forced to work on low budgets for everything. The Eagle project, it cost us staff time, it cost us lumber into building that platform, and it cost us almost nothing else. So right now, with rattlesnakes, we've gotten equipment, we've done surveys off the federal grant. We expect we'll get more federal grants to pay for the time in the field. Roger Williams Parks Zoo is doing all the husbandry for free. All the veterinary medicine and implanting of radios is free. We'll probably have to pay for radio transmitters, but we might do that from a grant. And what's a radio transmitter cost? About $300 each. So it's very, very small amount of money. For $10,000 we could run this for 5 years or more with radio transmitters, and it wouldn't take care of staff time and whatnot. But as far as the tax dollars are concerned, if you take all the tax dollars that go to from state tax dollars that go to all endangered species work. It's about $150,000 a year we get from the general fund for endangered species management, for eagles, for falcons, for orchids, for everything. And you divide that by the number of people in the state, it's 2 cents each. So it's really not much per person for sure. Whether you think that's a good way of spending taxpayer money, you know, our responsibility is to protect and conserve and manage biodiversity in the state. And so it's our responsibility, and we can't shirk that. It's irresponsible for us not to be taking actions to protect rattlesnakes just like bald eagles.
Hi, I'm Jason McLaughlin from Petersham. It seems like some of the, some of the objections to this come about because of concerns about the danger of the animal and concerns about the cost. But I would just contrast this with, you know, white-tailed deer are an animal that causes a lot of deaths because of people hitting them with cars. And we keep them around, and in fact, we spend a lot of money to encourage white-tailed deer because we like to have them around. This is not, this animal will cost far less money than that, and it will have far less impact than that. So it's a case of a small amount of risk and a small amount of cost for a very good thing to keep an endangered animal around. So I just don't, I don't see the risk or the expenses being particularly strong in this case.
Just a question out to the audience. What do you think is the most dangerous wild animal in this state? What wild vertebrate, bird, mammal, reptile kills more people in Massachusetts than anything else? Tick. Definitely, well, it doesn't kill that many people. It certainly debilitates them. And deer have a lot of connection with Lyme disease. Moose. We've had 3 human fatalities in 15 years. We have no legal ability to reduce the density, so we can't lower the risk. And that's three fatalities, not mentioning the much larger number of serious injuries. So moose is the thing you should be most afraid of in this state. Running down Route 2 and the Mass Pike are the 2 most dangerous roads in this state for moose.
Mark Page, Petersham. My wife and I have a farm right on the border of the Quabbin. Bear walk out of the Quabbin quite regularly onto our farm. We have rutting moose that can be somewhat aggressive. Fisher cat. We have a bobcat on film that goes across the farm approximately every day, I guess. We don't feel threatened by any of these things. I think a very shy and non-aggressive snake like the timber rattle, and non-aggressive, it just is something that wants to be left alone. The only time you're going to get bit by a spider is if you step on one. So I think it's rather an irrational fear.
Taking a lead off of your description of the animals in your yard, which would you rather be closed in your garage with, a bear or a rattlesnake? I think I'd take the rattlesnake any day.
I don't want to sound like I don't care, but why does a rattlesnake even need to exist? Is it beneficial to mankind? Is it beneficial to the earth? Does it control the population of some other creature more dangerous than itself? And should the people, my last question, should the people who drink the water from the Quabbin be concerned about the fact that a venomous reptile is swimming in their drinking water? No. Those are my questions.
No, I'd worry about beaver.
Is it beneficial to mankind?
No, you don't worry about beaver. Yes. Drinking water quality is absolutely not an issue. There's lots of things out there, the gulls, the ducks that are that are defecating in the water, you worry a lot more about. As far as the value of the animal, what good is it? The answer to what good is it is a personal question, and you have your own personal answer. Ecologically, there's no difference between a bald eagle and a timber rattlesnake. And for that matter, I'd reverse the question. What good is a bald eagle? What does it do for us? It gives us pleasure. And so again, it's a personal answer to that question. But ecologically, there's no difference. And that's not what our agency's mission and statutory responsibility is, to go ask which of these animals is worthy of our protection. It doesn't work that way.
Hi, my name is Mike Bronkovich. I live in Orange. I am an avid outdoorsman. I hunt, fish, and hike, and just enjoy the outdoors. I have been using and enjoying the Quabbin watershed since the early 1950s. I've noticed a steady decline in the availability of the watershed for public use over the years. By public use, I mean common people, woodchucks such as myself and some of my fishing and hunting friends, as opposed to the privileged people whom have access to Prescott Peninsula that I am not even allowed to walk on anymore. Only DCR bosses and high-ranking politicians are allowed to enjoy Prescott Peninsula and fish on the Windsor Dam side of the barrels. Bernie refers to this as a rigged economy, or in this case, rigged pleasure. The top 1% of DCR employees get the use of the choicest areas of the watershed and make a policies like introducing rattlesnakes to the watershed, which I consider absurd. If it comes to pass, experience tells me it has already been decided at the top. You have a public hearing to gather some support. I would recommend putting the snakes on Prescott Peninsula with the snakes from the top 1% of the DCR and let Darwin decide the outcome. Mostly public hearings are only held after the top 1% has already decided what the policy is going to be. A few words about the absurdity of stalking rattlesnakes in Quabbin. I only write this because I sincerely believe the top 1% at DCR are not smart enough to understand the inevitable outcome. Surely it is inevitable that someone is going to get bitten by a rattlesnake. Let's take a hypothetical. A DCR boss is showing his lawyer friend around the snake population. The lawyer accidentally steps on a snake and gets bit. Or do snakes not bite lawyers due to professional courtesy? The lawyer sues the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for zillions of dollars. The top 1% decides they have to close the watershed to all. Unnecessary humans. What is the priority here? People or exotic wildlife? In conclusion, this is just a subtle way of the DCR wants no people in the Quabbin watershed other than the top 1% of DCR and their political cronies. This is more to you, Mr. French. Thank you for patronizing us. You just had to say that rattlesnakes are cold-blooded instead of going on a deep, deep in habitat and on and on. Well, anyway, on the management of wildlife, there's been nothing but a problem in the 69 years I've been down there. Loons first. The top 1% decided loons had priority over common people. Bring on the lead ban. Everything in fishing equipment contains some amount of lead. This policy cost me and every fisherman untold dollars. To add insult to injury, loon palaces were constructed to make a better life for the loons. If I get caught on the reservoir in a thunderstorm, I have no shelter, cannot use the loon lodge. Okay, number 2, zebra mussels. This is another encroachment on my rights. Several years back, I bought a kayak special for fishing the polycod and McLaughlin ponds in the watershed. The following year, the top 1% decided boats would have to be washed and sealed to be used in reservoir, mainly so the zebra mussel wouldn't be introduced to a reservoir where biologists say they would be unable to reproduce. This policy cost me personally a little over $1,000. Number 3, the worst, white-tailed deer mismanagement. Back in the day, I would see deer and sometimes many deer on every visit to the Quabbin watershed. I haven't seen a deer in the watershed in the last 3 years. This is a crime committed by the deer herd biologists, perhaps due to pressure by the top 1% of DCR. It appears the policy is to hunt the white-tailed deer to extinction. That should bring you in, Mr. French. As long as they make money. No one cares about the deer population except the local hunters. Many of us local hunters, we get the overflow from the Quabbin. We started a petition to end the Quabbin deer hunt. We got many signatures and sent it to Boston. And maybe Ms. Whips can help me on this. She's the rep in this area. We never heard a thing back from it. And could it have been our problem that we had no signatures from the top 1% of DCR? I personally find the Quabbin deer hunt disgusting. First off, most of the so-called hunters are not hunters. They are shooters. They just want to kill something. These shooters drive around the watershed in their electric Hondas that the DCR issues in Boston. Deer can't even hear them coming. Before trying to establish an exotic wildlife population, maybe the biologists and management at DCR could try to establish a viable smelt population in Quabbin. All the fishing depends on the smelt population, which is down terribly. It is hard for me to believe that these wildlife biologists are this incompetent. I smell something rotten at the top 1% in DCR. Now that the snakes seem to be gone through, what is next? Will it be a pack of wolves or maybe mountain lions? Wildlife is a higher priority than common people in the Quabbin. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Somebody up here. Yeah.
I just have a question for you, and you're going to put these transmitters in the snakes. What is the lifespan of the battery that will be in those?
I didn't hear that.
I'd like to know the lifespan of the battery that you're going to be putting in the transmitter in these rattlesnakes. How long a period is that?
How long do they last?
Yeah.
The batteries on a rattlesnake transmitter lasts about 2 years. You put them in, you do surgery to put the transmitter in the snake. 2 years later, you do surgery to take the transmitter out and replace it. Every 2 years, and we only keep them in for 4 years. By 4 years, that snake has a completely established routine, so you don't need to follow that snake any longer. It's the new snakes you put the transmitters in. So we keep putting new snakes in the transmitters in the new snakes. You don't need to do it after 4 years. You already know what that snake's going to be doing.
I'm Max McPhee from Athol. You said that the 150 snakes figure wasn't necessarily accurate and that you would try to put 1 to 10 on the island per year. How many years would you do that? What would your ideal population be?
Well, that's going to be something we're going to have to follow. The question was, how long will it take? What are we striving for? We're striving for a population that is stable. And since it's going to be stable on the island, the number in reality doesn't matter as long as they all stay on the island, which they will do. It will probably take 25, 35 snakes to have an age range and enough females to be reproducing where they can produce enough young to offset mortalities. And we have population, and that's, I'm basing that on, how big are some of our populations that appear to be able to withstand, persist over time. They definitely get bigger than that. 75 is probably more typical of a decent population. And 75 snakes on that island will just disappear into the leaf litter. You wouldn't know they were there. Even us going out looking for them are going to be hard to find. So we don't know exactly how many there would be, but you got one major den site on the north end there, and so that's going to be the limiting factor, and the predation will be the limiting factor. But we want it, I would say, at least 35 animals, and it may be more than that. And it'll probably take us a decade or maybe more to get to that point.
Thanks. I have a comment, a question and a comment. I'm as concerned about the agricultural implications. Rattlesnakes are known dangers to sheep, goats, etc. And it seems to me from the map that Hardwick will be particularly affected if they get out. So one of the questions that I have is, what about subsequent generations? Are you going to be able to successfully put transmitters in subsequent generations? Okay, you say that, and that sounds a little bit dismissive to me. I'd like something a little bit more factual, because I want to make sure that there is no danger to the let me finish, to the agricultural element that surrounds the tip of...
How close are the closest sheep to Mount Zion?
Well, but how far is Mount Zion from the land? So
well,
that's one question.
I mean, if I understand what you're suggesting is they would not only get off Mount Zion, but they would successfully find some other place to hibernate, and they would thrive, and they would keep spreading until they get to some place where it's private property and off the Quabbin reservation. And
if they do get to non-Quabbin reservation land where there are curious animals, will you be able to track them? What is the control against that?
The limiting factor here is the fact that there is not adequate habitat for hibernation within reach of that island.
What do you mean by reach? Define reach, please.
4.5 miles.
What?
The 4.5 miles it would take, plus they can't find... I know. As the crow flies, they may be within that distance.
Well, or as the snake swims, right?
Now,
there's...
Rattlesnakes are bound to their site, and they're bound to it by odor. So they track their parents back, they track other snakes back. They do not go out and in the summer find a place distant from where they originated, and even if they could reach it, that's not where they would stay. They have a...
On that logic, rattlesnake populations would have never left the original den.
No, that's not true. The reason...
They follow their parents back.
The reason...
Every generation is following its parents back. How did they ever find a new den site?
The reason that they were widespread is that after the Wisconsin Glacier and the temperatures were warming up, there was a peak when it was far warmer than it is today, and they did not need deep sites to hibernate, as they do not deep in the south. You go down to the coastal plain of the Carolinas and Georgia, and they can hibernate in your backyard just like garter snakes can here. During that period post-Wisconsin Glacier, they were all across the landscape. It was only after the cooling period began, which was still long before European settlement, that they ended up getting trapped in these refugia, which had these denning sites. So, since then, and we're talking a couple of thousand years ago, they have not been able to move across the landscape. They're trapped in these places that have these hibernation sites. And so what you're suggesting just simply biologically doesn't happen. And as another sort of analogy, we have records for at least 100 years of our existing populations, not only in Massachusetts, but throughout the Northeast. We've never had a population expand anywhere. They've only contracted and disappeared. They don't expand beyond that habitat that was the limiting factor.
Why aren't they moving off the mountain, down Hoyle? If you're worried about them moving, why aren't those moving?
Right. They don't.
They're not. They're staying. Yeah, because every creature, whether it's us or an animal, they're right to live. Our kids are to see these things. That's something we want.
Hopefully.
And it's something about wild. They have every right to be on our land as much as we have to be on theirs. I hate things.
Yeah.
I'm Gabrielle Raddick. I'm from Oxford and Worcester, and as an ecologist and a herpetologist and a forester, I'm Gabrielle Raddick. I'm from Oxford and Worcester, and as an ecologist, a herpetologist, and a forester, what can those of us who are interested do to help?
Good question. We may need volunteers. Remember, we're on a low budget. It's hard for me to say. I mean, it doesn't take too many people to do what we're planning to do. But what it does take is we really do try to monitor our populations, our other populations too, to keep track of them. But on the other hand, we're sort of this hard balancing act. We always appreciate the help, but we don't want the snakes to get disturbed. I mean, right now, even to go photograph them, they're sitting out there basking. They're at the northern end of the range where they have really short summers and really short days. And just to go photograph them and disturb them off that rock and make them go down in the hole is bad for them. And so what we really want to do is leave them alone. And that's sort of what this would give us the opportunity to have as well, as a population that is safe from interference from people, not just to go out and kill them, but to disturb them, and so that they have actually a healthy population, one that is actually thriving and living the way they did, before we became such a populated state. We don't want them to spread. Spreading would be a failure on our part, because that puts them right back in conflict with people again. So we have every incentive to be sure that doesn't happen either. We will know really quick if we've made some bad judgment because of the first snakes, the first 50 snakes are going to give us a real idea of what these things are, how they're behaving. And they're very predictable. So I have no doubts that we're right in our predictions, in what we know, our knowledge. And that's the thing that makes them, you know, a little, thank you. You know, in some ways a little easy to work with because we know the kinds of things that are hardwired. They're not conscious decisions. They're hardwired to do certain things. And that's why it's so easy for me. I deal with peregrine falcons. They are so hardwired. I can move their chicks. I can manipulate them. I can move their I can do all sorts of things as long as it fits in that hardwired behavior that I know they have. And if you get out of that, then it's a crapshoot. But there's certain things you know they do. And that's, the snakes are just like the falcons in that regard.
My name is Tim Velton. I'm with New England Reptile. I am the venomous expert there. I would just like to say I think this project is a great idea. I hope it goes forward. And I just want to throw something out there. Every Saturday and Sunday, I do a venomous talk. Hands-on, I deal with rattlesnakes, cobras, puff adders. I know most of you have probably never seen a venomous snake. Come up, do the tour. Let me educate you. I will show you rattlesnakes. I'll teach you how to identify them, how to act around them, what they're about. We charge a fee. I will waive the fee for anyone from here that wants to come up. I think this project's a great idea. I'd like to see it go forward. Thank you. It's New England Reptile. It's in Pottstown, New Hampshire. It's a little bit of a drive. Come up, see a timber rattlesnake for yourself, learn about them, educate yourself. They're really not these vicious animals that people think. Everyone's afraid about getting bitten and dying. In the past 5 years, there's only been 10 deaths in the entire United States from a venomous snake. One of them was a cobra, so you take that one out of the equation. 9 people in 5 years. That's just over a person a year in the entire United States. You don't have to worry about dying from these animals. Thank you.
My name's Elizabeth Siren. I live in Hardwick. I have a couple of questions and I have a couple of comments. When I was reading one of the news accounts today on the internet, there was a link to a program that happened in New Hampshire where they brought snakes onto an island in Winnipesaukee. And I heard that that became a fiasco.
Urban legend.
Well, I'm not saying that everything on the internet is the truth, okay, but I'm just saying there was a link to something else, okay, and that they had problems in New Hampshire. So I'm just bringing this up.
No.
I mean, I did not do more research on it.
The
Okay?
question was, it was a suggestion that there was a similar project on an island, Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire. There have never been rattlesnakes on an island in Winnipesaukee. New Hampshire has 1 surviving population. They had 2 up until about 25 years ago. They haven't had others in a very, very long time. So that's a classic urban legend. It reminds me of the southern legend of the skier who fell into a nest of cottonmouths and was bit 50 times. It just completely fabricated. So that is completely fabricated as well.
Okay, the next situation is, since they no longer live in this area, by putting them on Mount Zion, would they not now be an invasive species?
No. The question is, would they act like an invasive species on Mount Zion? No. An invasive species is a species that's brought from far away here without its predators, its competitors, its parasites. They were part of the landscape here. They fit right into the web of everything else that's already here. They're essentially, as far as I can think of, the only major missing part of the original biological landscape, as reptiles go at least, for this part of the state. So they would fit right in. They would have the same predatory pressures, the same competitive pressures. They would act like they would fit in just like they did in the past.
My one last situation here is I have to bring up, first off, grant money is not free. It's federal money. It's our tax dollars.
Mhm.
So that your 2 cents may be state, but it's not. It's more money coming out of the federal budget.
Yeah.
But I have to bring one other thing to the fact that the United States government or any state government and animal welfare and animal wildlife and animal controls never works. Think the BLM and wild horses and what they've done over there.
The question is that these sorts of things to fool around with wildlife never. You know, that's not the sort of feedback I get as far as peregrine falcon recovery, bald eagle recovery, red-bellied cooter recovery. People seem to think they work just fine. People seem to love the fact we have bald eagles more often. We have 9 nesting pairs, I think, at Quabbin, about 11 on the Connecticut River. They fit right in just as they did historically, and people seem to like that. So I think I would disagree with the fact that these things don't work. Now, if you're talking about moving exotic, animals from one continent to another, rabbits to Australia, cats to New Zealand, zebra mussels to Lake, Massachusetts, that's a different story. Well, where's Marion? You got the next one?
Hi, I'm Dan Hammock from Irving. I'm on a finance committee, and most small towns around here have their budgets held together with scotch tape and paper clips. They're very strapped. I just want you to, first I want to thank you for coming out here instead of making 100 of us travel wherever you're from. And thank you for the education. It's good. But sometimes fact is overshadowed by fallacy. People believe other things, even if they're not true. And all the small businesses we have around here that depend on tourism, Hardwick, Belchertown, Ware, Orange, Athol, New Salem, if they lose a few $100s or a few $1,000s worth of business because people think erroneously, we're stocking the place with rattlesnakes. I'm not going to bring my kids here to mountain bike or hike or fish because there's rattlesnakes here. And if it affects our local economy in a negative way, people can't afford it. Those small businesses pay the taxes we can use to buy an ambulance or fund the schools. So just ask you to consider that it may have a negative impact on recreation, which is one of the things you mentioned. I don't know anything that would drive tourists away faster, whether it's true or not, if they think we're stocking the place with poisonous, venomous snakes.
Yeah, I mean, the question or statement was that the reputation of having venomous snakes could drive off tourists and people visiting. It's plausible, especially if there's a lot of, misinformation surrounding that, and it's made a bigger deal than it is. I would note, however, that it certainly hasn't reduced the attendance in our other state parks and state forests where we already have known populations that are have been fairly sizable, nor any of the state and federal parks and wildlife refuges across the entire country. Until we lost timber rattlesnakes in Rhode Island and Maine, every single state in the lower 48 had rattlesnakes, not just venomous snakes, but some form of rattlesnake. And there are many, many federal parks and state parks around the country where they are a common species. Walk down the trails in the Grand Canyon, and you'll often come on those narrow trails with a big old black-tailed rattlesnake sitting in front of you. And you've got to walk around them, because on federal parks they're completely protected too.
Hi, my name is Kat Bordeweek, and I am the co-founder of Downdale Farm Wildlife in Bernardston, and we have been serving Franklin and Hampshire County for about 10 years now. And just from my experience, around average 80% every year of the animals that we take into our center are from human-related causes. So we hit them with our cars, they run into our windows, they build nests in construction areas and such. And I think that people are really missing. The crux of this project is to keep the snakes away from you. We really are here to protect the snakes, and I think that Tom has done a really good job of trying to explain that, and that the risk is so minimal. And again, we're really trying to protect the snakes from people, and that the idea that we're trying to protect the people from the snakes and how minimal that really is. It really should be the other way around.
Oh, wait, I want to give some people that haven't had a chance to say.
Hi, my name's Kurt Schatzel. I'm president of the New England Herpetological Society, excuse me, in Weymouth, Massachusetts. I just wanted to say that we're a group of people who actually keep snakes. We keep them as pets because we love them. We also do a lot of research with them in conjunction with the state of Massachusetts and with Tom. And to address some concerns about grant money, it absolutely is free. I would be happy to pay for transmitters to use in your animals, and you know that. Everybody here knows that we give out money. We run reptile expos to do that very thing. We get money from that, we generate that money, and we put it back into projects exactly like this that are herpetologically related. Herpetology is a study of reptiles and amphibians for those who don't know it. I think the project's worthwhile. I've spent my entire life roaming around the Blue Hills since the 70s. I'm 49 years old. And there were rattlesnakes there. People lied about how many there were there. There were actually more there then than there are now, many more. I found my first den when I was 12. I've probably photographed 150 rattlesnakes in my life. I've never once come close to being bitten. As far as allaying fears, whenever we talk about snakes, it's always a huge deal. Everybody freaks out. And, you know, some of us do, some of us don't. But you're talking about, the numbers we're talking about here, you've got a better chance of seeing a timber wolf in Massachusetts. That's all I wanted to say.
I'm going to follow that up. My name is Amanda Sargent. I work at the New England Aquarium, so I work with a lot of endangered species. I work with the really cute ones like sea turtles. A lot of people love them, and we get a lot of support for protecting beautiful sea turtles. I pull balloons out of dead sea turtles. I pull plastic bags out of their stomachs after they've died. And I've seen a lot of animals be killed by people. But I'm not pointing fingers or anything, because this is our chance to save one. We are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction that this earth has ever seen. The last one happened 65 million years ago. You might remember it. We lost the dinosaurs. Species are going extinct at a rate 1,000 times faster than the natural rate. This is literally a chance that we have in our hands to save a species. And this mass extinction event that's going on right now is human caused. And there's so many things that we do that are out of our control, like climate change, plastics going into the ocean, all these things that are so hard for us to control. This is one thing that we can do for just one species that you will never see in your lifetime. And so I know that it's hard to wrap your mind around it because it's not a cute, cuddly animal, but it's still a chance for us to redeem ourselves, and it's still a chance for us to have one positive impact in a world where there's a lot of negative. So I just hope that you guys will consider the fact that instead of having this be this big issue that's getting everybody up in arms, this is a chance for us to do something good for the world. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Frank Ford, Orange, Mass. I just like to know the timber rattler in this part of the country, New England area, is endangered. But how many timber rattlers are out in there throughout the United States?
I think the question was, is the timber rattlesnake more common in other places? How many are there? I have no idea how many there are in other parts of the country, because they're, it's like how many white-tailed deer are there? They're not monitored that closely in other parts of the country. But yes, timber rattlesnakes go all the way from the mountains of Georgia, north to New Hampshire, west to Minnesota, Missouri, and so they have a big range. Now, Having said that, our responsibility is the biodiversity of Massachusetts. We didn't decide not to try to restore bald eagles because Alaska is full of them. They were gone from here. And so this is where our responsibility is. And so they are endangered here. And so it's our responsibility not to let them disappear. And I really, after almost 400 years since the Pilgrims arrived, I don't want them disappearing on my watch.
I'm Elise Berry from Paxton, and I grew up in West Virginia. I grew up in West Virginia, and Mr. French noted that in West Virginia they have large populations, so 150 in the populations that you find. And I know that they were a lot more populous when I was there. And I grew up in a house that was about an acre of land. At the end of the land was a rock cliff, and we know that there were rattlesnakes there because my mother ran over one with a lawnmower. I think hadn't attacked her, she just saw it, and being concerned, she ran over it. But I was the oldest of 6 kids. I was there from grade school through high school. There were tons of kids in the neighborhood. Nobody ever even saw the rattlesnakes, much less got hurt by them. You wouldn't have known about it. Somebody in the neighborhood got stung by a black widow spider, and the whole neighborhood knew about it, and the street was a mile long. So I think if I can live that near large populations of rattlesnakes and never have a problem, and all the kids in the neighborhood never had a problem, I don't think that even if they actually got off the island, which sounds totally illogical, you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Benner. I live in Whately, and I should first of all say that I'm not an innocent bystander because I am a veterinarian who's helped to put transmitters in some of these rattlesnakes. But I would like to say there was a gentleman, maybe it was you, who was saying something before that maybe people were chattering at the same time. But I do think, like, one of the big things it seems to me that people are so worried about is that these snakes are going to spread, you know, that they're going to be around your sheep or your kids or your dogs or whatever. But you have to realize that there's only a few populations now and they're shrinking. I live in Whately, and you know, people have mentioned Mount Tom. There's only a few snakes left there, I think. But Mount Tom is not an island. Mount Tom is just a mountain in Holyoke and East Hampton. If the population was going to spread into the surrounding area, why isn't it doing that? Why isn't it doing that in the other parts of the state? Why isn't it doing that in Massachusetts? The only thing that's happening to these populations is they're shrinking, 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 because people kill them faster than they can reproduce. So I think this is great to put them out on an island where they won't get killed, and maybe they'll actually get a self-sustaining population. But the idea that they would be able to get off of there and make this like expanding wave of rattlesnakes across Massachusetts, I mean, if that was going to happen, it would have happened a long time ago, and that's just not what's happening with these snakes. So I realize it's scary. I'm terrified of spiders, and you know, but I like snakes, but I realize that there's people who absolutely don't like snakes. And so it's a scary thing to try to think about, but I just don't think that it's rational or realistic to think that there's going to be this population that's just going to explode across Massachusetts. It just doesn't make sense with the way the snakes have already been behaving in the states. They're just, in this state, they're just winking out. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shelley from New Salem. I've got to say, I didn't know much about this till I came to the meeting, and it has been informative. I am not a fan of snakes, sorry. But it seems like tonight there were a lot of people that are here in favor of the project. I wish you had taken a survey of in favor or not in favor before so many people had left as far as the project goes. I would like to also say that I don't know if you intend to have another meeting, and if you would be able to publicize it ahead so people could plan on coming to any future meetings.
When we're done, I'll just gonna thank people when we're done, okay?
Are there any more questions?
Do you want to say anything about the 14th?
About the what?
Again, I don't.
Yeah, you will.
Bill Pula again from Quabbin. We do have the Quabbin Watershed Advisory Committee's meeting on March 14th. Tom's going to come. I think we're going to have another snake expert there. Tom, we do programs at Quabbin this time of year quite often on Sundays. Tom did one a few weeks ago on mountain lions, and the snakes came up, and he talked about that a little bit. We certainly will invite him back next year as this program progresses to talk about how it's going there. We can. It's typically a Sunday at 1 o'clock at Quabbin in the visitor center downstairs, and they're quite popular. So. Just cool. From my standpoint, as I've been the superintendent at Quabbin for 24 years, I'm really a water guy. What we care about mostly is water, but our mandate at Quabbin is to preserve water for this and future generations, and also to protect the resources of the Commonwealth. And I consider this one of the resources. We do the eagles, we have loons, we have quite a number of rare and endangered plants that we keep an eye on and make sure they're doing all right. This fits right in with it in my thinking.
Do we have any more? Do we have any more questions? Do we have any more questions? I just want to say one thing. We have a hard job. We've been given the job of looking out for the biological diversity of the state, and I don't think we need to be very careful with that. We shouldn't leave that up to a popularity contest. There are some people in this state that don't like turtles. So do we not protect turtles? I think we need to be very careful with that, and we feel like this is our job and we're trying to do it. We focused on this species because it's one of the rarest species in the state, and we need to pay attention to it. The other thing I would mention is the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife has been one of the most active agencies in trying to preserve public access for public recreation. We do it with we have over 208,000 acres. It's all open to public use, and we're committed to doing that. So there's nothing involved in this in restricting the public's access. This is all about saving one of the most imperiled species in that state. And I don't think we should put it to a public vote, or we're going to have real problems, because what else is someone not going to like? So that's why we do this. I just wanted to make that point. And I really wanted to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Okay.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming and putting on the program. Doctor, it was a very, very good presentation.
Thank you.
And I'm a lot smarter now than when I walked in the door. The other thing is that I heard that some people here were concerned about political corruption. So I'm going to tell you is vote for Bernie.
Thank you.